May 27th, 2015.
Yeah, I'm Phillips, and I'm presently serving as the outreach coordinator for the Mindful Veterans Project, which is part of the Purple Mountain Institute. I'm a Marine combat veteran of Vietnam, and I have PTSD, and I've used mindfulness, and particularly the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, as a way of coping with the fact that I have the PTSD and the things that arise from that. I was in the Marine Corps from 1963 to 1967, and I was in Vietnam from early 1965 until early 1966. Then I got 3 months in Japan, and then I was back to Vietnam for the remainder of my enlistment. So total of 21 months.
And what happened with your PTSD during that time? How did it evolve, and how did it impact your life?
Well, it's a little bit of a complicated situation, and I think one that they're more and more beginning to address, is in that the whole reason that I was in the Marine Corps at 17, I turned 17 in March, and I was on Parris Island in April. I was running away from a dysfunctional family. When I was a child, when I was being physically beaten, I had to just lay there and take it. If I didn't just take it, then I just kept getting more. And the other one was some betrayal issues that people I was supposed to be able to trust that were looking out for me, they just didn't. And these replayed very much when I got to Vietnam, and we had a major that was the executive officer. Every time we had a formation, and I'm talking about like in May of 1965, we went in March, and by May, this guy standing up front of the formation and saying, "Man, I know what we're doing here doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but that's because you can't see the big picture." And after maybe a month or so of that, one day the old man, the lieutenant colonel, came out, the commanding officer. He stood up in front of the formation. He said, "Man, I have to tell you the truth. There isn't any big picture."
Huh.
This was June of 1965. At that point, we were maybe at 50,000 people in the country. I don't even think the number was that high. And we just kept pouring people in. And the guys on the ground, it was already obvious that this whole thing was a mistake. So there was this sense of all of the sacrifice that was going on, that it was for nothing. It inevitably turned out how it had to.
And so when you first came back to civilian life, were you aware that you had been affected, and how did you come to discover your own PTSD?
Well, long before I came back, at the end of my first tour in Vietnam, I still had a year left on my enlistment. If you analogize it to high school or college, I spent my junior year in Vietnam. And at the end of which, I knew I was crazy. I wasn't so crazy that I didn't know I was crazy, but I was around the bend. And if I had come back to the continental United States, that kind of military discipline, I'd have had a general court-martial once a week, every week. My attitude had gone worse than south. So they had this wonderful deal of here in Japan, in my overseas tour, really good. I liked Japan. So GI paradise kind of thing in those days. So I did the deal, and I went to Japan, and I checked into the outfit, and I reported to the major. And he said, "Congratulations, you're the new vacation NCO." And I said, "Embark's like, Major, what are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, we go to Vietnam in 6 weeks, and you're going with." So it was, I suppose you could call that a moral injury in itself. They plainly hoodwinked me and took advantage of it. It took a little longer than 6 weeks, maybe just because the embarkation NCO was very slow at doing his job, getting the unit ready to ship out. I wasn't in any hurry to get back there. So when the time came that a year later when I came home and got out, I had already had a drinking problem. And now I had a really serious drinking problem. The way I could deal with my feelings was to anesthetize myself to them. And the biggest feeling I had, to be quite honest about it all, was rage. I was just really, really angry at what had been done to me and to so many people. So many people that we lost for just no reason. Good people. So I was doing a ton of drinking, and then I started using drugs. I had never used any drugs until then. And then I started doing drugs, just anything I could to not feel what was going on with me, because it was too painful. I didn't know how to deal with it. Some kind of self-destructive stuff, doing kind of stupid crimes that were the equivalent of throwing a brick through the police station window, because I needed punished for my part in all this. And I got myself arrested for a third-rate burglary. I was drunk on my butt. Well, in fact, I never committed a crime that I wasn't drunk on my butt. And as a result of the action with the court, I wound up going to a residential treatment facility in Jordan, Minnesota. It was the equivalent, for people who are familiar with Hazelden. It was Hazelden's second place, 12-step model. And to give you a time frame on it was during the time of the 72 elections, because one of the fellows who was there, his brother was actually running for and he went to the convention. He took leave from the place while I was there. Got to know. It wasn't effective for me. The 12-step thing, I wasn't the guy for it. Came across what I just saw there, even court decisions told them it was a particular kind of religion and it wasn't me. And so I achieved some temporary sobriety, but not much. And that went off and on for some years, and I got more and more into drugs. There came a time when I was experimenting with this. This is right about the same time that post-traumatic stress disorder was first put into the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Before this, it didn't exist in the books. It didn't have a number, so there was nothing they could really treat. They could get paid for treating. So I was doing some self-help with hallucinogenics. And in the course of it, I sold 10 heads of LSD to an undercover policeman. I wound up sentenced to prison for 12 years. So I spent some time in maximum security at the Indiana State Prison. And well, that was enough that when I came out of there, I never did any more crimes like that. Much worse, but I was still, and I quit using drugs. I occasionally dipped. I just became a straight up alcoholic. I'd go to the store, get my 18-pack, go back to the house and sit and get drunk and go out. And I existed like that for a long time. Get up in the morning and go out, go to my construction job, do physical labor all day, and get drunk all night. Sort of an endless cycle. So finally, I was with a woman. I was with her for 20 years. And it had become a loveless, lonely kind of coexistence. And there came a time that my daughter had, she took her own life in a jail cell. She hung herself rather than go back to prison because she couldn't quit using cocaine. And I just wouldn't accept that. made up all kinds of stories about how she was really in the witness protection program. I find just enough evidence of her online that somebody was using her identity, and I kept pretending that she was alive. And one night I was pretty drunk, and I jumped up with my enthusiasm because I really found somebody actually using her identity. And, oh, I found her, I know where she is, and the woman I lived with mocked me for it. I became so angry, so enraged, that I wanted to beat her to death. I really did. And of course, I really didn't want to do that either. I couldn't handle that. So I picked up the phone and I called 911 and I reported myself as a danger to others. The police came and they picked me up and said, take me to the VA. And they took me to the Tucson VA where I first went through the drying out program. And when they let me out of the immediate program, I didn't have any place to go. I didn't want to go back to the house where I'd been living. I went into the homeless veterans program, and I was living in a transitional housing facility. And during that time, I got really serious about doing all the programs that I could that were available through the VA. And that's when the transformation in my life, kind of the beginning of the transformation, began.
Were you at Esperanza and Escalante?
No, I was at a place called Coming Home.
Oh, yeah.
E&E at least at that time, was more for the residential substance abuse program, and I was in the outpatient program. I don't know how those decisions get made, but I was very fortunate that the VA had a place that they could put. And during that time, my claim for my service-connected disabilities funding came in, and I received a substantial back payment. So I was sitting in the homeless veterans transitional facility with $30,000 in the bank. And I didn't want to leave. I needed to stay in that structured environment for a while. And I made the transition in an orderly way, a planned way. Rather than just, I got my money, I can go run off and do whatever I want. And it was during that time that I was walking through the Tucson VA and I came across a flyer for the program, the Mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And I went down and I did the program, and it helped me connect all of the other programs that I've been through. I've been through so many teaching programs that were all cognitive learning, and I've learned so much stuff, all the names and everything, but it wasn't helping me change my behavior because it wasn't giving me the tool I needed to bring the training to bear at the moment that it was happening. And through the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, the practice of meditation, I came to be much more in that moment, and to be able to catch the trigger as it happened, and to, as they like to say, I wouldn't not have the trigger, but I could relate to it in a whole different way. Most of which was to notice it and say, oh yeah, and let it pass. That was the beginning of the big changes in my life.
How long ago did that occur, Bob?
Now, 3 years ago.
And was that taught by Teri?
Yeah, Dr. Teri Davis. I'm going to feel bad because I can't remember her last name, but a woman named Dana, a PTSD psychologist. She was Teri's co-teacher at that time. And I was so taken by that I've since done every class that Teri has taught, every one of Friday nights that are for women veterans only. So I've pretty much continued done this 4 nights a week. And at least 4 or 5 times a year. In the meantime, then I became interested in trying to give back a little bit, show my gratitude. So I worked as an outreach coordinator and went around finding other veterans who were suffering and introduced a lot of them to the program. And finally last year, I went trained with Dr. John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santorelli, folks who created the Mindfulness-based stress reduction program. I trained to become a facilitator. And since then, I've begun facilitating at the Purple Mountain Institute's Wednesday night program near the U of A campus and at TA as well.
And have you worked with any younger veterans, and is it any different working with younger veterans than the Vietnam, Korean, World War II generation?
Well, I've sat in programs with younger veterans, and I've worked with in MBSR with them. I think there's a couple of things that happen there, at least from my point of view. One of them is that it seems to me that the fresher the traumatic event is, the closer in time to the trauma, the easier it is for somebody to deal with. What my experience has been that the older guys, particularly, I never was in a program with any World War II guys, but more than your Korean guys and a whole bunch of Vietnam War guys. In the 40 or 50 or 60 years since we experienced the trauma, we've developed coping strategies. Whether they're good coping strategies or bad coping strategies, it is, staying dry is a coping strategy to not feel that pain. And we've insulated ourselves so thoroughly, so strongly that it's tough to break through the shell. The younger guys haven't had that much time to develop that strong a set of armor. Not that they don't have a set of armor, but it's more fragile and it's more easily pierced. So it seems to me like they have more success in a lot of the programs. At the same time, the older guys, and I see it mostly in Vietnam veterans, they're desperate by this point. We got this far in our lives and get in our 60s. Stuff starts catching up with us, all of the things we've experienced. Life slows down. Maybe we don't work as hard or we retire, whatever happens. But there's just all of a sudden a realization about how crappy my life really is. As forward to, now death's door isn't a half century away. It's, maybe a decade away. What am I going to do with these remaining years? Am I going to keep sitting here suffering? So the folks come to the program with the Vietnam vets especially, with a sense of desperation. On the one hand, it makes my heart go out to them, but it's refreshing to see because it motivates the fellas like it motivated me to really want to do this, not just blow this off and go through the motions.
Well, there's something there because very frequently we only become conscious when we realize that we failed. And then suddenly we become confused and say to ourselves, well, this doesn't work. And so, I've got to find something that works. And so that confusion may actually bring people to the first time to a point where they become conscious of that very uncomfortable feeling that maybe everything that we've been doing doesn't work. And that's an important moment. It's kind of an aha moment. So you're saying that many younger vets don't strike you as having yet had that aha moment.
Correct. I don't see in them the sense of veneration. It seems to me like there's a time period, the first few years after a guy comes home, or a gal, whoever, that they're just able to float through stuff. They haven't worn out all their relatives. There's still some couches yet they can sleep on. People will put up with their stuff for a while. But somehow it seems to me like about 5 years in, all of a sudden, the run out of those kind of options. They burned all their bridges. Now things get hard. And that's the time that it seems to me that veterans start looking for answers. Before that, it's, well, I don't really have a problem. I just drink a 24-pack and a quart of whiskey every day because I like it. The tendency to want to normalize the behavior. But at some point, the DUIs start to rack up. The domestic violences and all those kinds of things that go with being an angry, intoxicated person. Oh, I think that actually goes in. I guess something I've left out is what often, I guess the most commonly comorbid condition with PTSD is depression. And I suffer from massive depression. And I have bouts that I just can't do anything. And especially during depressive episodes, rumination, going back and thinking about this and thinking about that, how this could have been different, leads inevitably to that same kind of regret. And it also leads to those feelings of guilt and shame. Some of us have been conditioned into believing that if you're guilty, you need punished. And that was why I was the kind of guy who threw rocks through the police station window.
Right.
Come out here and arrest me, please. I need this. I deserve this.
Well, John Kabat-Zinn in his book on full catastrophe living says something, and I think that, of course, this has been known in the Buddhist meditation tradition for a long time, and this is probably one of the more frightening and tough things to do and to learn when you're doing MBSR, but you slowly approach that and you begin realize that you can't do that. He says you have to invite your pain to be with you as a friend. You need to pay attention to it instead of running away from that regret, instead of burying it under chemicals or whatever, rage. We have to learn to live with that and just watch it. And that's perhaps, I think, because I think as a warrior, we want to believe that we can do something about whatever problem that we're facing, but the idea that you have to just sit there and you're not going to be destroyed by that regret, by that pain, that you're going to have the ability to achieve some distance is phenomenal.
I couldn't agree with you more, Steve. I do, especially when I think in terms of PTSD. They often describe it as a three-legged stool: hypervigilance, re-experiencing, and avoidance. And the way that far too many of us seek to avoid confronting our pain is through substance use and abuse. So that it becomes like a signature response. Now, particularly in the days when I was setting my pattern, I came home in 1967. It didn't hit the books until 1981 as a treatable condition. And in the days before that, they used all the same criteria they use now to diagnose me as a psychopath or a sociopath. So I collected a string of those kinds of diagnoses. And it was the same thing, the emotional numbing, not learning from the behavior because I was avoiding looking at the consequences, looking at what I was doing. Trying to drown my sorrows, as it were. And at the same time being very, very angry, which would got in this ridiculous cycle of going out and getting. I used to go to knife and gun club kinds of bars, a place where everybody was looking for just so I could get in a fight. You know, over the quarter for the pool table or something as stupid as that. And did a lot of barroom brawling. And I hurt some people, and some people hurt me. And both of which were new occasions for regret and guilt and shame to add on to the pile. And the pile just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And like yourself, I became suicidal. I had a couple of half-hearted attempts. One time I washed 300 over-the-counter sleeping pills down with a quart of vodka. I passed out in my truck for about 4 days. And when I woke up, I discovered that my body had been smarter than my head was, because probably 295 of those sleeping pills were now dried in a cake on my chest where I vomited them all over myself while I was unconscious. Another time I went out, I was so serious about it, I deliberately went to the secondhand store looking for a vacuum cleaner hose. And I found just the right size that would fit the tailpipe of my car. I put it on the tailpipe and then to the window and duct taped it all tight and everything. Got real drunk and got in the car and started the engine up. And one of the things I found out was that odorless, colorless, tasteless gas, it's not odorless and tasteless. It might be colorless, but it drove me out of the car. I couldn't sit there with it. It was so nasty.
Right.
And that's the only reason that I survived that. There came a time after that I had the pistol out. I cleaned the pistol and loaded it and put it on the nightstand. It wasn't a question of if, but it was a question of when. And for some reason, I got taken with some good sense and went down to the emergency room at the VA and turned myself in for suicidal ideation. And they sent me to a program where the only thing that I really did, they sent me outside the VA to a different program. I wound up redirecting my anger, not at myself, but at the fools that had me basically swim to the oldies with Richard Simmons kind of thing. It was very aggravating. This isn't what I came here for. Sign me out. Get me out of here. So I've had those times when I've looked at it and I've looked right in the eye. I remember laying in bed and thinking about all the different ways I could kill myself remotely. Suicide by cop, or step out in front of a truck, or all those things like that. And I just couldn't bring myself to do that to the cop or to the truck driver. I had at least that much left in me, but that was about all I had. I didn't care that I would die. I cared about the mess. If I shot myself in the head now, somebody was going to have to come find that mess and clean that up. And I didn't want to do that to somebody.